All right, good morning, everybody. We have another part of our series that we're trying to just get different information out. One of the things that I don't think is getting talked about enough is the threat to our United States Postal Service. And uh, I just know growing up here in Sioux City, but also especially when I would go visit my grandparents on the farm, getting the mail every day was one of the highlights of the day. And that threat that we would not have a postal service is here. I mean, it could happen unless we get DC to shake things up and get it funded again. And so some of the things that I want to point out about the United States Postal Service: it's the second largest employer in the nation, with over 600,000 workers, including 97,000 veterans. The Postal Service processes and delivers 472 million mail pieces each day. They deliver paychecks and life-saving prescriptions. They help our small businesses. They go that extra mile where UPS and FedEx don't in a lot of these rural communities as well. And probably most importantly, that the doesn't get talked about enough is the Postal Service receives no tax dollars for their operating expenses, and they rely on the sale of postage, products and services to fund their operation. And so just to reiterate, zero tax dollars. And so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something else. But our guest today, I'm not a fan of introducing people when you can introduce yourself. So Kim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. And thank you for having me join you today. I'm Kimberly Karol. I am a proud postal employee. I've worked with the Postal Service for nearly 30 years, so I've grown up with the Postal Service. I am proud to say that I am the current president of the Iowa Postal Workers Union, so I represent postal employees all across the state in 4 different crafts: clerks, maintenance, motor vehicle, and support services. A large group of people, mostly clerks in the state of Iowa because of how we are organized. But I am very proud to serve in that capacity. I guess I'm very encouraged that you're having this conversation, because it is my greatest fear that there will be major changes happening, and the public won't be aware in time to be able to voice their opinion. So it's really important that we're having this conversation and trying to make sure that the public understands what's happening, because this is a public postal service. It is not a company, and it is not for profit. It has never been for profit. And so we can't look at the Postal Service in the same way that you would look at a business that is for profit. So I'm really glad that you've invited me to join you today.
Well, thank you. So I guess, could you describe kind of the current situation and why we're calling out to save the Postal Service at this time?
Well, there's been a real problem building since the 2006 Postal Enhancement, or PEA. I never remember what that is.
A lot
Sorry.
of acronyms in good government. No worries.
Yeah. But that is a pre-funding requirement for the Postal Service. And what it essentially does is it requires the Postal Service to pre-fund its retirement 75 years out into the future. So we are required to pay for retirements for people who aren't even born yet, may never work for the Postal Service. So that's a huge burden on the Postal Service. But on top of that, that happened in 2006, and then we had 2008, where we had the recession, and people stopped using the mail as much as it had in the past. And that really is sort of the trigger, because the pre-funding was put into place when the Postal Service was handling quite a lot of first-class mail volume. And that is where the greatest profit margin for the Postal Service is in that first-class letter. The mail has changed. People are using the mail differently. And so that has created a problem because we're not getting as much first class mail as we had in the past. We're getting a lot more advertisement mail because since we deliver to every address, companies and small businesses alike can target their advertisement to parts of the community. And so that's what's growing. And there's not as great a profit margin in that type of mail, as well as parcel mail. There's been a huge increase in parcel mail, especially after this COVID pandemic hit the states. People are staying home, they're ordering their mail, or they're ordering their groceries and their staples by mail. And we are making those deliveries. But the problem is that all of that financial burden is now coming to haunt us because we're just not getting as much revenue. And unfortunately, right now, the government, the leadership is not willing to assist the Postal Service like it is for other businesses that are impacted by COVID. And that's unfortunate because it clearly shows a lack of public interest in how they're doing that. It seems to be more of a corporate interest, in my opinion.
So one of the issues you mentioned was, so we have to, for the post office to survive, they have to prepare for retirement for somebody in 2094.
Correct.
That's like 74 years out. I mean, you got to go up to 75 years. And so, but again, you guys get most of your revenue or all your revenue from just the services. Is that right?
Products and services, yes.
Yeah.
We are not supported by tax dollars. It is a portion of every stamp, every package that we deliver. That all is part of how we are funded.
Yeah. And then, so with the retirement part of it, how does that, do you just have to set money aside, or how does that work, I guess, in the whole budget system? I don't know if you know the budget of it all, but.
Well, I'm not as versed on that, but for the company as a whole, the pre-funding is supposed to come out of our budget at the beginning of our fiscal year. So it's $5.5 million that they have to put into this fund or account before we make any money at all, before we sell a single stamp in the fiscal year. That money is supposed to be put into this account. And it's unreasonable to think that any business would have that kind of money available before they can even start selling their products and services.
Right.
And so that's why we say it's important that you understand that this happens before we can even begin to raise money.
Right. Could you talk about what would happen if the Postal Service was privatized or I mean, shut down in any way?
Well, the first thing you need to focus on is that the Postal Service is a service. It's not a business. It is a service that was created by Benjamin Franklin. We are almost as old as the country itself. And it is in the Constitution as a mandate that we provide universal service to everyone in the country, which means that it doesn't matter who you are, how much money you make, or anything. When you come to the post office, if you want to send a first class letter, you have to pay the same amount. 55 cents right now is a first class letter. And believe it or not, it's one of the lowest postage rates in all of the industrial world. But you're treated the same. And the idea was to be able to ensure that everyone had a means of getting information and communicating back and forth. And it was also designed, because if you think back to when the country first started, there was problems with messages being intercepted. And so it is the most secure means of communicating because we are not allowed to open or to inspect or any type of mail. And so it's a very highly secure means of communicating. So I don't know if I got distracted there,
No,
but
no, it's very helpful because I think a lot of folks, they know they can put it in their mailbox or they can drop it off, but like the whole process and how it gets funded and all that. I mean, this is a major, again, the second most employees in the nation or employer in the nation.
right. And we've been around for a long time, so we've had lots and lots of practice on how to perfect what we do.
Right. And again, getting back to what I mentioned earlier about being on the farm with my grandparents, can you talk a little bit about the significance of rural communities? Because here in the 4th District, we're the second most agriculture producing district in America. We're very rural. And what are some things that the Postal Service kind of does in these rural communities?
Well, the Postal Service provides all kinds of services to farmers. Actually, rural carriers, although I'm not a rural carrier, but they act as a mobile post office. They bring stamps out to customers. They can sell stamps directly to customers in limited quantities. They provide, package services, letter services. We are bringing periodicals. I mean, we're keeping the information flowing to those rural communities. And many, many more rural communities and farmers are purchasing a wide variety of products through the mail to include getting their medications. And that's saving time for farmers in particular, because, we're going into planting season. And, farmers spend ungodly hours out in the field working from sun up to sun out, and they can't afford to come into town. And so the rural carriers are out there bringing the necessary things to the farmers out there.
Yeah.
The problem with privatization is that is not a profitable place for businesses to be delivering. It's very expensive for them. It's one of the reasons that the Postal Service is the final mile for UPS and FedEx in most rural areas. We already have the infrastructure and the commitment to provide services to those areas.
So if I send a package to a rural area that UPS doesn't go to, the last mile or the quote unquote or the last little bit, the Postal Service takes it?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
UPS and FedEx drop to us on a regular basis so that we can provide that final mile delivery.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. What are some of the things that we can be doing to help the Postal Service?
Well, it's going to be really important that we're speaking to our legislators, to the senators, and to our members of Congress, and letting them know how important the Postal Service is to us. And really taking stock of what the Postal Service means to you and to your communities. We need to be signing petitions. We need to be sending letters, making phone calls. Unfortunately, in the COVID period, it's hard for there to be any kind of demonstrations, but people have been coming up with some creative ways of being able to show their support. There was a Facebook drive not too very long ago where people were asked to buy stamps by mail because you can order your stamps and the carrier is going to deliver those stamps to you. But in a way of showing support, because that's how the Postal Service sort of determines whether or not an office is how long the office should be open is by what we call retail credits. And that's by how much products and services are being sold out of that office. And the nice thing is that you can increase your community's postal service footprint by ordering things through them directly by mail.
Oh, that's good to know, because I literally have a stack right over here of thank you cards, and I was supposed to go. They're the postal card or the postcards, and so that's a different stamp. And so I've been meaning to go to the postal office and to get some of them, but now I can just order them online.
Yes, you can order them online.
I'm going to do that right when we get done. That's great. See, this has already helped a little bit. So,
well, good.
Yeah. So when we talk to our legislators, what is there a specific ask we should be having right now, or what is it? Or should it just be, let's say, the postal USPS?
Well, right now the most important ask is for Congress to include the Postal Service in any type of stimulus package. We've been included in the last 3 and have been essentially vetoed out of each one of those packages, except for allowing us to have a loan of, and that's not what the Postal Service needs. We don't need to go further into debt. We need to get the same kind of treatment as what's happening with Boeing and other companies, where they're actually getting money to tide them over, and that's the kind of help that we really need. So that very first ask needs to be that we are part of the stimulus package. And even the Board of Governors appointed by Trump has been saying that that's exactly what we need. So that would be huge for the public to raise their voices and say that the Postal Service is important to us and we want you to keep them in this stimulus.
Absolutely. And so I have a phone number for folks if you want to call your member of Congress. We'll put it also in the comment section below, and that's 202-224-3121 to support the United States Postal Service. And the Senate is the biggest thing, because in the House, it was passed the USPS Fairness Act. And what we need to do is get that passed in the Senate now, and that would end the agency's burdensome pre-funding mandate for future retiree health benefits. And I think that would be a huge burden lifted from the Postal Service, and so we can continue to have this amazing service that we've always had. And so,
well, and that's really part of the issue, is that the Postal Service for everyone has been around since before they were born. Yeah. It is something that is inherent in our day-to-day lives. Even if you don't do a whole lot of mail or writing letters or whatever, every day when you come home, you're probably checking your mailbox. It's part of what we do. It's ingrained in us. That's going to get taken away from us. And the fact that you can check your mailbox 6 days a week is also probably going to get taken away from us. And that becomes a huge hardship for seniors and people who are disabled, because they can't get to the Postal Service.
We got a good question here, and if anybody has a question, put them in the comments. We'll get to them the best we can. Is it better for people to order online or to go to the counter? And for rural communities, would it be better to order online or go into town and get it done?
It's actually better for you to visit your local community post office. Okay. They have immediate, that has immediate impact on their retail credits. And so if you're able to do that, that is preferable. It just shows that you are supportive and it is still necessary. Because one of the issues that we have is that if there isn't a whole lot of traffic in those offices, they are at risk of being closed. Because again, unfortunately, our leadership is looking at the Postal Service not as a service, but as a business. And so please go to your local post office if possible.
Okay. And then we got a question online here about the motive of the private sector. And I don't know if you'll know the motive, but They were wondering, is the strong motive of the private sector, is it to get the universal database of the United States Postal Service? Is that?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to that directly, but you have to keep in mind the Postal Service has been around for 200 years. We have
Yeah.
a very extensive network. We have a fleet of vehicles. We own real estate in prime locations. We have over 1,400 post offices that are on the historical register right now. So there's a lot to be gained by selling the Postal Service. I mean, you're going to get that network. You're going to get all of the equipment and the vehicles, you know. So it's not just the database. It's more of the whole picture. This is something that has been growing and, again, perfecting for hundreds of years. So it's a very efficient operation.
Yeah. And do you know how many people here in the state are employed by the Postal Service?
I am not sure of exact numbers, but nearly 1,000 or 8,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially here in the rural areas, I think well, I know there's 600,000 overall throughout the United States and 96,000 veterans. And I think disproportionately in rural areas, there's a lot more veterans being hired. That's what we tend to see. But I got a question here. It's more for me on in Congress has contributed largely to the Postal Service inability to innovate and restructure through its unwillingness to take any action or even stop the U.S. Postal Service from making an organizational change. How would Mr. Scholten make the USPS a priority if he were elected? Well, I think this is a great question for not only do we have to, the very bottom line is we got to keep the Postal Service existing, but what are other options we can be doing? I know banking is something that gets talked about a lot, or adding services to help make it more profitable, or not even profitable, just to make sure that we can continue to, that the Postal Service can continue to self-fund. Those are all things I'm looking to get into and would love to discuss more, but also technology and how can technology being put into this situation. I've heard of, and I don't know if, I worked at a company that was working on creating chips to go into cars. And one of the reasons they were innovating this technology was to put into Postal Service to have just that constant data of what's happening and what services are being provided, what services are not. And so I don't know if that's from the Postal Service perspective, but there's a lot into technology that we could really use in these rural communities. And so I don't know, what are some services you would be looking for in a member of Congress or actions that they would, yeah.
Well, I think that it's really important that we get some flexibility in innovating our products and services. And for rural communities, one of the things that we have been advocating for is to have the Postal Service be a hotspot, because the real problem is that there is not reliable internet everywhere in this country. And in large communities, they don't understand that because they have the 5G or the 4G or whatever. And in rural communities, they still have dial-up in some places. But the Postal Service could be that community location where we could have a hotspot, a Wi-Fi, and then anyone in the community could come and have access to the information or the internet. And so that's one of the things that we are trying to advocate for, because that's how the structure has been used in the past. Whenever there has been a need to have something out in every community or available in every community, the Postal Service has been that organization that has stepped up and taken that responsibility. I mean, we sell the duck stamps, we have the flags for veterans, we were doing selective service. So it's in every community, and we should make good use of that infrastructure.
Yeah. And I just can't stress enough, especially right now in our democracy, with being told to stay home, but we still have a primary coming up here in a lot of different races. I don't have a primary opponent, but everyone get out to vote. One of the best ways we can do it is absentee ballot request forms, which should be sent to every registered voter in the state of Iowa. And so a couple things before I let you go here, just to reiterate, folks, if you want to save the Postal Service, call your member of Congress, 202-224-3121. Ask them to include the Postal Service in the next recovery package. That's the first ask. The second one is to ask the Senate to pass the USPS Fairness Act. And this is, again, the Postal Service. I couldn't even fathom living in the United States without having that. And one of the things in this time of COVID, I get to know my neighbors a lot more. I sit at this desk and work, and then every so often I just go for a walk, and I get to know my neighbors a little bit. And there's a woman down the street who her children have grown and moved away, and so she's down there by herself. And one of her biggest interactions is with our carrier, and it's just some of the relationships like that. I mean, are just, I mean, they're invaluable, and let alone all the services that the Postal Service does for us. And so, do you have any remarks that you would like to let folks know?
Well, I would just like to just remind people that this is not a political issue. It should never be a political issue. It's a public interest issue. This is about whether or not we're going to have a means of communication that is affordable for everyone and provided to everyone, regardless of where you live or regardless of what you do for a living. It is for everyone. And that's something that we need to make sure that everyone understands. If you want to continue to have a service that allows you to communicate, you need to start to speak up now.
Absolutely. And so I can't urge everyone enough. This is so important. So our campaign is going to continue to push until something gets done, because we all understand how important this is for especially rural communities. I mean, my parents and my family members who are getting older, they rely on the Postal Service to get their prescriptions, and just so many different wonderful things that the Postal Service does. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today, and just we're in this fight together, and reach out if you have anything that we can help you get out more. So,
thank you, and
all
good
right.
luck to you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care, be safe, and we'll talk soon. And Cody will